Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. We are excited to be with you all today. In this session, Help Wanted, the nonprofit sector and changing employee trends. We know this is a conversation that may strike close to the hearts for many of you. So thank you for joining us. We do want to note just a couple of things as we get started. This session is being recorded, so just make a note that it will be available for you to go back and review later. Many of you are familiar with how New works and have been in leading and learning before, so we do want to also just give you a heads up that there is one more leading and learning left for the year on November 16th. And we're still kind of feeling out what the theme of that is going to be, but really thinking through how this space, how we steward community conversations, especially around these really tangly issues for nonprofit leaders. So if you want to register for that, you can do so now, you can do so later. We'll take a hiatus in December, and then we will be back in January. We also want to give a shout out to one of our new programs, Road to Resilience, which is oriented towards building financial acumen for nonprofit leaders. Most of us come into the world, into this nonprofit world from an orientation of direct service, of social work, of different kinds of backgrounds, but those don't tend to be financial. So New is creating our first cohort for Road to Resilience. So I want to give you all a heads up about that. If you're curious about it, you can check out the web page here. I'm excited about it. I have helped plan it. Hamida is also involved in planning it. So I want to just give you a heads up about what's coming down the pike. As we get started, want to also acknowledge that one of the principles of leading and learning is that we benefit communally, our communities benefit when we invest in our local relationships and in our local conversations. And so leading and learning is really about convening local leaders in Washtenaw, in Wayne, in Macomb, across Southeast Michigan, who know local dynamics and who have local relationships. But to fully honor what it means to be engaged locally, we also need to know the history and the story of the land where we live. And so we want to acknowledge that this land that we are on is stolen and unceded land of the Ottawa, Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, and Potawatomi people who still live and survive and thrive here. Many of you have heard us talk about New's vision, which is vibrant communities, flourishing organizations, and empowered leaders. But we are increasingly aware that we cannot reach that vision unless our native communities are vibrant and flourishing and empowered. And that might mean advocating against our own perceived self-interest, against the culture, the cultural norms that were instilled in us, and it certainly requires us to change. I remember being a teenager hiking in the wilderness of the Cascade Mountains, which was my home at the time, and learning that the area where we were hiking was near to an indigenous sacred site, and that white people were not allowed to go in that area. And at the time, it was unfathomable to me that in this wild earth, there should be a space that is closed off to me. Today, I remember that moment and understand that in honoring and respecting that boundary and staying out of that land, I can make a small act of reparation. I can make a small gesture of respect. Land acknowledgements are flat if they acknowledge only history. And so when we share this land acknowledgement with each other, it is a way of calling ourselves to a flourishing future. Each of us can and must in our own work, and we're able to in our own work, support the Indigenous communities that still live here. We each have a role to play in advocating for greater Indigenous sovereignty, elevating the voices of Native artists, leaders, and teachers, and repairing the centuries of genocide. So, as we acknowledge the land that we live on this morning, I invite each of you to ask the question of yourselves: what can I do to support the flourishing of the Ottawa, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, Anishinaabe people? What can I do to support the communities that have lived and survived and thrived here for thousands of years? And if you can't answer that question, I invite you to hold it as homework. Hold it, carry it with you, learn as we all learn together, and wait for those answers to unfold. Seek those answers and live into them. And that is the spirit of leading and learning. We are seeking answers. We are in progress together. And I want to pass it over to my co-host, the wonderful Hamida, to give us some grounding for this morning and the answers that we are seeking together.
Thank you so much, Hillary, for that beautiful grounding, both in our physicality of our spaces and also our virtual space for leading and learning. And I'll be thinking past this session as well, so thank you for that. So let's kind of revisit what gathered us here today, really talking around the shifting sort of employee and employer landscape, given what some folks are being sort of naming as the Great Resignation. And so I will just totally hear you, Rebecca. Thanks for being here. Just uplifting really what brought us here, that prompt. So the last year and a half has, for some folks, crystallized their alignment or misalignment with their professional roles. Employees have shifted their priorities around values, breadth of impact, and work conditions. How is your nonprofit adapting to these shifting recruiting and retention trends? We'll go beyond recruitment and retention to discuss the ways nonprofits are reporting or responding to COVID-driven changes, given the very nature of the work. So knowing that we're all coming here at different places and spaces. Some of us are possibly, or in some ways, really keenly differently impacted. So we thought, what better way to get a sense of the room, a little bit of a sense of the room, is to have a brief poll that folks could share on two questions. A, have you changed jobs since March 2020? I think about when the pandemic first, I think when folks in my circle first started realizing and accepting the pandemic was an affair that was longer than 2 weeks, that was a really big trajectory shift for us. And our second question is really curious, are you currently on the job market? And through Google Poll, this will not display names or anything else like that, but we'll get a sense of in the room, if any of these things are happening for you. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Zoom Poll, I am about to launch the poll, and you should see a window pop up on your screen where you're able to select responses. And possible responses are less expensive than I typically go for to kind of get a sense of really where we're at. So there isn't an other. Oh, and seeing responses coming in. So I think we have about 10 out of 12 respondents. And since I launched the poll, I can't see the poll. So I am going to display what our group is holding. So 45% of folks in this room moved to a new organization over the course of the pandemic. And 2 of those folks changed roles within the organization. And 4 folks held it down with the same role that they've had throughout the pandemic. And I see in terms of who is on the job market right now, there are folks who are seeking to, almost half of folks in the room are seeking to actively fill positions within their organization. And there's another half that are not either seeking for themselves or to fill roles for their organization. So really helpful for us to just get a snapshot of how folks are entering this space this morning. And I want to do a quick check. Yes, yes, please engage in the chat. And I'm going to borrow a few more minutes to really get a sense from our audience, if folks are up for sharing, maybe 1 or 2 folks. How has your perspective on work changed over the course of the pandemic?
And we're not super formal here, so you can go ahead and unmute yourself if there's a thought coming to mind.
Also, if you dig chat, I'm happy to read that out loud for us as well. I value my personal time more. So thinking about what is, perhaps thinking about that balance and what true balance could look, yes, and work-life balance, flexible work-life, better work-life balance is a necessity rather than a preference. Absolutely.
I think, Julia, I would just jump on that a little bit and add that I think for myself, I've realized that I just don't imagine going back to the office 40 hours a week again. Um, and that's something we've talked about at New, that will probably stay primarily hybrid. Uh, but you know, you don't always realize what a shift that is.
Absolutely. Etta uplifted boundary setting within myself and with others. Bev shared learning to engage more in empathy and grace as we all struggle with sickness and bereavement. Absolutely, Bev. There are some times that I have to remind myself that while in some ways we've created the new norm for ourselves or new norms, there is still a pandemic that is going on that we're all collectively weathering. So thank you for that real reminder. Oh, Bridget, I heard it said that work is personhood and personhood is whiteness. I'm trying to dismantle my attachment to my paid employment as a primary identifier. It is a process. I want to verbally echo that heart. I think about also, whiteness and white supremacy, but also what it means to be a factor of capitalism, and that we are as valuable as much as we can produce, right? And that is definitely a process. Thank you so much for sharing that vulnerably. And we hope that within our time today, we're able to surface ways in which we can tend to us as people, and people that are valuable before we even think about how we produce. Etta brings up capitalist ideas of work and white supremacy, and thinking about how internalized sexism exacerbates this. Thank you all so much. And Etta, I so appreciate that comment. And please feel free to keep connecting with each other in the chat. But want to shift us a little bit to introduce our speakers. So we have with us Etta Heisler. Etta was born and raised in Ann Arbor, and though she left briefly to attend Brandeis University in Waltham, Massachusetts, and work in the Boston area, the Midwest has always been her true home. Her formal training is in education policy, nonprofit management, and community organizing, and grassroots relational community building is at the core of her leadership style. Etta has served in the nonprofit education field for almost 20 years in summer camps, religious schools, preschools, after-school programs, and adult education programs. Previously, she served as Director of Programs for Leslie Science and Nature Center and the Ann Arbor Hands-On Museum, where she led community committees for cultural merger, strategic planning, and equity inclusion initiatives. Etta is now the executive director of Apple Play Schools, where she works to build a future childcare industry that helps both children in care and adult employees to thrive. Etta enjoys cooking food for her friends and family, eating chicken tenders and watching movies, singing folk music around the campfire, and volunteering at Ellie's Place, a youth and family bereavement support organization. So glad to have you here with us, Etta. We're also joined by Flavio Di Stefano. As our building coordinator at NEW, Flavia manages all things related to NEW's physical space. The home base for much of NEW's operations, this complex task includes facilitating conference room bookings, leasing spaces, managing tenant relationships, and maintaining our building, the NEW Center in Ann Arbor. Originally from Milan, Italy, Flavio moved to the Mitten in 2013. He received his bachelor's degree in international relations and French language and literature from Oakland University and is currently attending the University of Michigan's Master of Social Work program. Before joining NEW in 2020, Flavia had worked and interned for a variety of local and national nonprofits. At NEW, Flavio strives to connect and collaborate with the building residents and partners to develop a network of mutual support and dedication. And I'm going to add a little bit more meaning. I'll take a little bit of license. I hope that's okay, Flavio. Yes, an awesome pumpkin carving event last night for our new peeps. Um, and that Flavio is going to be a grad soon, and so scoping out the job market, and kind of a lot of insights that Flavio will offer today is sort of holding what it means to be in coming with a social work background and also seeking work out, and really what are some of the considerations that he's holding and thinking about what next steps might be. So thank you, Flavio, for being with us this morning as well. So with that, I will transition and hand over our facilitation back to Hillary to start us off.
Yeah, and just a reminder for folks who haven't been to Leading and Learning in a little while, we'll chat with Etta and Flavio for about 25-ish minutes, and then we really want to get your voices and your questions and your experiences in here too. So feel free to carry on in the chat, but also share any questions that come to mind or hold those questions, and we'll invite those questions in a little bit. So this is really a dialogue, and part of what we value about Etta and Flavio is that you are coming with different experiences, and there is just so much as we had this planning conversation, there's so much tangled in this question of what are the employee trends changing, what does it mean to hire people at this point in the pandemic and in our lives, culture, economy. So just to start us off, we'd love to hear, Etta and Flavio, what are the changing trends that you've noticed, and how have you personally been impacted? So Flavio, can I ask you to go first?
Sure, Hillary. Yeah, I was thinking about this question, before this meeting, and if I look down, it's because I have some notes on a notebook, so that's why I'm referring to that. But first of all, I think that the nonprofit trends, the employee trends that we notice in the nonprofit sector, I think are undeniably connected to nonprofit trends that are happening outside of the nonprofit sector as well. So in the for-profit, in the educational sector, I think we're seeing these trends happening at all across many industries. And I think a couple of things, and I think there's both positive and negative in these trends, and it's kind of like it's a spectrum of positivity and negativity in the trends. I think, the first one that Manny already mentioned in the chat is that there seems to be greater flexibility that has come with the impact of, the COVID-19 pandemic, and therefore we have more hybrid and more flexible workspaces. And the way that that has impacted me is that I'm able to participate in more things. So, which I don't know if it would have been possible if we were in hybrid, because of the way that the masters are set up. You have internship, you have classes that are often during the day, you have other projects that happen at different times of the day. So I think, for example, this morning I'm at my internship, but I'm able to join you all virtually, 8 to 9 before I go on with my internship. So I think that's one thing that I'm taking back from these trends, and that I hope that it'll continue to happen even after I graduate, because I'm sure that after I graduate and after other folks graduate from master's program, and you all too, you'll continue to do outside things from your work. Your life is not just your job, you'll have other things going on. And I think this hybrid flexible space really helps with that balance, like many of you pointed out. And then the other thing that I think has surfaced, which it's much larger, I think, and it might be harder to put into words or to understand, is that I think that employees and former employees that might have quit a job or switched from one place to another are starting to feel more empowered. And I think this feeling has built up over the course of the pandemic and decades before, but I think we're kind of at a tipping point where we have employees that are feeling empowered and empowering one another, and understanding what they need, what they're willing to risk, what they're willing to give, and what they're willing to get from a position, and making a decision from that, and often not holding back. I think we're seeing that especially in the service industries, where people have been greatly maybe mismanaged, or have been overworked and have been tired for many years. I think right now they have reached a tipping point, like I said, where they are more connected to themselves, more connected to their thoughts, to their needs, to the needs of their families, of their friends, of their communities, and are able to shift more rapidly in this environment, probably empowered by one another. So it's kind of like also a communal movement, if you will. So those are the two thoughts that I had.
Yeah, I mean, 150% to everything that you said, Flavio. I think coming from, also, hi everyone, I'm Etta. And I'm the executive director of Apple Play Schools. So we're sort of in a unique corner of the nonprofit industry, in that we are both a nonprofit organization and an early childhood education organization, which is, a really fun and extremely challenging place to be right now. And I think workers especially, really understanding their power and understanding agency, and being more willing to yield power and agency in the job market, I think is something that we're really seeing. One of the struggles for me as a leader, and someone who has positional power in our organization by being the executive director, is that I have always identified with the worker, like the struggle of the worker. I went to socialist camp for 13 years and grew up in union, like learning about union organizing, and I have background in community organizing and social justice activism. And so this moment for me personally is a little bit like, it's really strange, because I'm like, workers of the world unite, like let's get not just a living wage, but a thriving wage for everybody, and flexible work time. And as the leader of a childcare organization, I'm really understanding some dynamic tensions around that, in terms of what happens when workers demand those things, and how able businesses or organizations are to pivot around that. And so I think in the nonprofit sector, what I've seen lately is a lot of folks who are in direct service organizations really asking, how worth it is it after 18 months of being constantly stressed out, experiencing, as Bev said at the beginning of the call, my own traumatic experiences around illness or death or loss, like general grief experiences. Like, I'm seeing a lot of folks at all levels in service work asking this question of like, is it worth it for me to do this? And as we've been talking with folks who are either stepping back, like reducing their hours working with us or looking for other employment, a lot of folks are saying, I'm struggling to regulate myself and help kids be regulated all day. And it's really, really hard. And we're seeing our staff really struggling with that. So I think that's one trend also that's sort of leading to this desire for flexibility, the desire to be able to work less hours and do more with those less hours, and find opportunities to do that. And I think I'm seeing in executive director groups that I'm a part of high levels of executive directors asking that question. And something I'm really concerned about is what impact is that going to have if we have a mass exodus of leadership in service industries. And I think that that's a really big question for us to think about. And then the last piece, just looking specifically at caring organizations. Like I said, I work for an early childhood organization, and the sort of flexibility that we can give is extremely limited because we're providing care for actual human being people who have a lot of needs and need a lot of support and are also experiencing their own trauma, plus are learning how to human during this time. Kids under the age of 6 have a lot going on. And so the demands that are put on our staff are often set by employers in other industries. So when families are required to work 50, 60, 70 hours and adult caregivers at home are needing to work that much, that means they need to find care outside of the home for those hours, which means that we have to figure out how to staff that to provide care. And so there's this sort of continuum of, on one hand, the community sort of coming together around that, but also it creates a really dynamic tension between, there's a lot of conversation right now, especially with the work the Biden administration is doing around making care affordable for families. But the big question I ask is, if care is affordable for families, it's probably not affordable for the people working there. And so, well, we can keep the costs of care low by decreasing tuition. If the only way childcare centers and caregivers working in the home or preschools are paying their staff is based on that tuition, then it means their wages are lower. And so we're really seeing a massive reckoning about that within the caregiving and education field nationally. And we are absolutely experiencing that at Apple Play Schools in this microcosm. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing such a nuanced response, Etta. I hear in terms of employers and employees are on the same team, although at times it doesn't feel that way, but working toward that shared purpose. And that reminder of that our interconnection and how our organizations inform each other. And that real clear example, so powerful. I did hear you talk about going to socialist camp, and I know a little bit about you as well, and that raises for me, and I'd love, Etta, if you could share first, how are you at this time able to pull some of your personal values into the professional values or the way that you're moving through work given this time? How do they show up for you?
Yeah, I shared right as we got on this call, I'm feeling pretty vulnerable about this question today, especially just as we're struggling to figure out we had to close one of our schools for a half day today just because we had so many teachers out sick. And I know that that has a ripple effect across our family community. And so I've been struggling a lot with in my personal values, I prioritize doing work that gives people power and treating people as humans deserving of respect unequivocally. And so it has been really difficult for me to separate my value as a person from the work that I can realistically do. And so, especially as someone who grew up like watching Newsies and thinking like, okay, newspaper owners who are exploiting their lowest wage workers are like bad people, like morally bad. I then am turning that judgment onto myself to say, okay, if we can't afford to pay our staff higher than what we're paying them now, without, becoming insolvent as an organization, am I a bad person? So that's one place where my values are really showing up and causing me some really harsh self-judgment. And that absolutely is contributing to the burnout feelings that I feel of like, well, maybe it would just be better. To be clear, since this is being recorded, I'm not planning on leaving this role, but I do, as we all have thoughts of like, maybe it would just be better if I didn't do this. I think I come back to, I took this job in November of 2019. So 4 months before the pandemic started. I'm a first-time executive director. I'm young. And so I'm still figuring out how to do this work. And then the pandemic hit and here I was. And I have been grateful every day to have a job where the people that I work with believe the same things that I do. And for me, that's what's keeping me showing up, is to know that we all have a vision for what the world should be and will one day be, that we can work towards incrementally. And being able to do that work even when it's hard is the thing that's keeping me connected. And being able to come back to those values that we have around radical respect for authentic peoplehood, radical respect for childhood and putting children at the center of decisions that we're making, and a commitment to building a model that honors the peoplehood of not just children, but also adults in our community and especially our employees. And those are the pieces that I'm coming back to as I'm communicating difficult things and making really difficult decisions.
Add a little something about kind of like this contrast of values, or like tension of values. I think I'm feeling something similar to Etta, but in a different context. I think I think what I'm seeing clashing in a lot of social work students and within myself is our own personal values, and a lot of us of purpose of service to others, and which also the social work code of ethics draws upon. But then also understanding that the code of ethics and the social work industry, or the social work arena, has also often not valued enough the social workers, which is an interesting dilemma, I think, which are the workers exercising their values in this field and not being valued enough. And so I think there's a struggle for students, for recent graduates, especially those in the service areas, of exercising their values and seeking employers that will uplift those values, while also recognizing that some of those values have always been associated with lower wages, less benefits, less personal and work boundaries. And so how do we enter the workplace with truly trying to exercise our values in our workplace, and also receiving that concrete recognition that our values and the skills attached to our values are valuable to the workplace and to the organizations that we are joining. I think that's my struggle, and probably the struggle of many other students. I don't want to speak for them. That's
I just hearing you say that really resonates with me, Flavio, especially talking with educators across the industry. So I have a lot of friends and colleagues who are working in K-8 education, some close friends who are working in universities and colleges. And this idea basically that because we believe in our work, because we're committed to it on a soul level, and know that it has this greater, higher purpose in the community and investing in the future, that should be enough for us to make up for the lack of benefits, or make up for the lack of pay, or make up for the, impossible or too demanding schedule. Or, something we've been talking about a lot in our program is our staffing ratios. Is it possible that we maybe pay our staff a little bit lower than other schools, but have more staff in a classroom so that teachers have more flexibility and support? And there's so many different solutions to that. But as I'm listening to you, I'm feeling a sense of rage that expectation is being put on me, and that perhaps without really realizing it, that I've put that expectation on my team for the last 2 years that I've been in this role. That it's like, oh, well, because we, have feminist values as an organization, and you get to spend a lot of time outside, and our classes are small, then like that should be enough, and you should still show up to work for $11 or $12 an hour. And like, it's not okay. It is the way things are right now. And it's going to be 3 to 5 years for us to build a different model at our organization for it to be different. But I'm having a sort of like moment of awakening about that, and realizing that like, actually, I'm really angry about that. I really think that it's wrong. And I'm trying to figure out how to take responsibility for that.
yeah.
I also think that it's reflective of the fact that we exist in this larger system, right? That is a system that values people, we already have talked about, like, because of white supremacy, because of roots and sort of like Puritan beliefs, and like the Christian hegemony around, doing good gives you worth, things like that. We in the United States live in a culture that really puts work first and values that, and values people around that first. And something that Hamida said in our planning conversation has just like punched me in the gut over and over again since last week, in a good way, Hamida. That part of the challenge is that we are living in a system that actually doesn't care about the generations that are coming after us. That if the system that we lived in believed in it, in investing in future generations, then the way that we think about childcare, the way that we think about employment and child rearing together would be different. And so I'm wrestling with that a lot. And that's what's coming up for me when I hear you talking about how social workers are undervalued and always have been, right? And like, you're being trained now, you talked about this in our planning call too, like you're being trained in a system where it's expected that you're going to do free labor through internships, and it's expected that you're going to take these high stress, low paying positions that have no flexibility, because you're doing it for the good of humanity. And like, that just doesn't cut it. It never has. But now people are discovering their power and their voice around that.
Yeah. Yeah, as you're talking, sorry, Hillary, just real quick, as you're talking, I'm kind of smiling, but inside I'm kind of like, yeah, this sucks. Because I think, for example, at my internship or at other places, I've heard the sentence over and over: you're not doing this for the money. Like, you're not doing this job to get paid. Or I've been told, oh, I was talking to someone, I'm doing, MSW. They're like, oh, that's not smart, and so a lot of comments as well from people not inside the industry that have picked up on these trends in social work and other social services that you mentioned, Etta. So it's definitely something that outsiders also are noticing, and it feels bad sometimes when someone that is not in the field comes to me and tells me, you know, what my arena is and what it is not.
Exactly.
I think that begs the question for me. And as we think about this, there's so much tangled in this idea of work, and it's influenced by so many other things. Um, what feels like it's within your control in your current context, and what feels like it's just systemic, right? Like if we're thinking about the serenity prayer, and grant me the the courage to change the things that I can, and acceptance for the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. Like what is the difference? What can we do?
That's a great question. I don't know if I know the answer. um, one thing I'm thinking about is that when I see systemic oppression or systems working, I can name them. And I can release myself from the responsibility of the existence of those systems. I cannot release myself from the responsibility of figuring out how I build a reality for my staff and the kids in our schools that subverts those systems or dismantles those systems. So I think for me, like this is a hard week. This week at our schools has been one of the hardest weeks we've had. I'm feeling April 2020 vibes all over the place. And for me, showing up to this conversation so that I can say, hey, I know that this is messed up, and here are the things that we know, and here are the next steps that we can take, is the only way forward. I've often thought of it as like, it seems like I'm standing on a cliff, but if I have my headlamp on, I can see one step in front of me to know it's actually not a cliff, that there's something there. And that's really where I feel like we are right now. And so figuring out, like, how can we ask our families to lean in, the families that we serve, and lean into the values, invest in the values of our organization? And how can we ask the broader community to invest in the future of our community by investing in early childhood, people who maybe wouldn't have in the past? And so that's something that I'm really thinking about as a lever that we have to move.
Hillary, can I ask you to repeat the question real quick?
Yeah, we've talked about all of the systemic pieces that influence the way that we move through the world. Flavia, what feels like it is within your control to respond to, and what just feels social, systemic, completely beyond your ability to influence?
Yeah. Well, I think what is in my control is that I know who I am, and I know what I bring to the table, the skills and the values that I bring to the table. So I know that, and in my head, I associate certain responses from organizations that I am engaging with. But that's just in my head. So I think what is outside of my control is how these organizations that, maybe I'm, if I'm interviewing with an organization, or if I'm doing some other, third-party work with an organization, I can present to them, what I bring to the table, and the skills and the values that I've built over the years in the social service sector. But what is out of my control is really how that is perceived from the other party. And I think we kind of discussed it in the other in the previous question, of that tension of, how is social work or social service, how are they valued by the industry and by the agencies that are working in the industry. And so until organizations and executives and just people in power make that switch, which right now I don't think is in my control, I don't think that the social work arena is viewed as it should. and is viewed as an arena where there's a lot of potential and there's a lot of talent. And this is happening also, I think, in the for-profit sector. So I'll just give you like some personal examples. I think I'm looking at positions in the for-profit sector as well. And I think because of the way that social work has been shaped over the decades or over centuries as well, even right now, which is something that's even further from my control, I think, is how social work is seen in the for-profit sector and how valuable it is for how valuable it would be for some companies to hire social workers in their, let's say, HR teams or in their talent acquisition, in their kind of like organization building teams. And until they realize that, there is always so much I can do in my application or in my storytelling of what I'm bringing to the table. But there needs to be a switch and to understand the social work practice. And I'm talking about the social work practice. That's what I mean. That's what I know most. But I'm sure there are other social service industries that this can be tied to as well.
I'm just gonna say one other thing, Flavio. What you're saying just resonates so much. As a camp professional, summer camp professional for many years, we always talked about like, how can we help our camp counselors write their resumes to demonstrate like all of the things that a camp counselor would bring to a team. And I like would love to have some social workers on our team. I think it would benefit us so immensely. I think something else that came up for me in what you were saying is that something I've taken away from the Centering Justice community conversations that we've been having this year is that like thinking about systems and what power do I have. I feel that one of the ways that white supremacy and internalized sexism function within me as a white person and a white woman in a leadership position are that like I can just say like, oh, like this system is happening and like there's nothing I can do about it, right? Like the childcare market doesn't allow that I can charge more. When like the reality is like I have power. And every adult in our community has power. Every child in our school community has power. And it's my responsibility to figure out how to ask folks to lean into the power and figure out how to get us moving in the same direction about the things that we believe in together.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do that yet, totally, but we're figuring it out. And that, I think, to me is what's really important, is to remember that like it's my personal responsibility to get everybody together and build that power. And when people are pushing back or raising questions, that's good. When employees are demanding more, that is good for me as an employer. And I just need to think about what those demands can do to get us closer to our mission.
Yeah, and I mean something real quick right now. So like I said, I appreciate you saying that, Ada, because that made me think of something else. Like I said, I don't think I'm in control of what the organizations or the businesses are thinking and how they're perceiving social work. What I have been doing though is that talking to other social work students and and having this conversation of, hey, you're worth more. You bring so much. You would bring so much to the organization, to the business. You need to enter the job search with that mindset. And also look outside. Don't just look at the places that have always been associated with social work. Because like I said, you can bring your social work skills, your social work education to so many other industries. But we are not taught that at the masters. That's not something that's discussed. They don't tell us, oh, maybe look to apply at Stellantis, the huge automotive company. We're not told that because those high-paying positions have not been associated with social work. So it's having that conversation with students as well to let them know that that is a possibility.
Thank you so much, Etta and Flavio. I had one more question that I wanted to ask around sort of like what are the moves that you're making? I feel you both already kind of started answering that. Self-determination and sort of how you're seeking work, and not seeking an external definition from an employer of the skills that you have to contribute, but really assessing and evaluating and being very upfront around this is what you bring. Etta, I heard you talking around what it means to receive those demands. And as an organization, think about how you can shift and change to incrementally in ways that you can address those demands, right? And create the conditions that folks are asking for. I want to reserve a few minutes for the question in the chat, but anything else you wanted added? What are the moves that you're making now?
Yeah. What we're looking at right now is figuring out what needs to change in our model, both short term, middle term, and long term, to increase compensation for our staff and to increase the capacity of our schools to have basically like more, that we could have more students for and more teachers, so that we allow for more flexibility. Those are some of the biggest things that we're looking at on sort of like the Yiddish word is tachlis, the English word is practical level. And we're also looking at bringing new folks onto our board who can help us imagine, envision, and connect with other folks in the community who are able to do that. Right now, our board is pretty small, has a pretty limited scope. So we've been revising our bylaws and working on a matrix of who we want to recruit next. If anybody here knows folks who are interested or want to get in on some of this work, I'd be really excited to talk with them, to really think about building a board that is coming from a paradigm of investing in community through early childhood, rather than on supporting a school. That we're not a private school that needs support. What we're doing is we're one institution investing in the future of the community, and we're interested in connecting with other folks about that.
I think I have a little bit less than someone that's going to be entering the workforce. I think a couple of things. I think I'm just trying to stay open. Like I said, I am looking at different industries. I'm looking at the organizations that I'm with right now. I'm looking outside. I'm trying to kind of break the social work boundaries. And at the same time, I'm also trying to think about what skills that are usually maybe not associated with social work can I bring onto my plate that would match well. So, for example, user-face design. It's one that matches quite well with social work, because you're thinking about accessibility and inclusivity in the technology arena. Yeah, financial literacy. Also very well paired with social work. So how can I bring other skills that are not associated with the social work industry onto my plate, so that I can branch out and go outside of the social work, workplace boundaries.
Thank you for that, Flavio. So there is a question in the chat. What indigenous and ancestral practices can we draw upon to help us reimagine work? What untapped wisdom is within us? And I'll offer that Etta started responding as well.
Yeah, I think I'll just say it out loud for folks who aren't able to view the chat, that especially as we come to this time of year and sort of the like whitewashing and co-optation of Thanksgiving, and like in working in an education organization, it's like for a lot of folks, this is the only time of year that we're teaching young people about Indigenous history, Indigenous present. But this has been on my mind a lot in terms of thinking about what it means to build work that focuses on renewal, that focuses on cultivating for the future and always investing in the future, and honoring the resources that we have, whether those be natural resources, human resources, the resources of our building, but drawing on that wisdom to build a different paradigm, and a paradigm that's focused on renewal and replenishment instead of extraction. Like, how can we get the most out of the people that are in this building right now?
Sarah. That's great. I'll keep it short because we're tight on time, but I think just even reimagining, rethinking where work, in what, like how we interpret work and where work lands within our lives, and the percentage of dedication that we give work rather than giving it to other areas of our life that might be more enriching. I think, this probably also comes from, no, never mind, I'm not gonna say that, but yeah, I think reimagining how much time and how much place work takes up in our life, and what else can we do with that other chunk of time that we're not dedicating to to professional work. Because after all, a lot of the other things that we do outside of work, travel, connecting with people, volunteering, attending gatherings, those are the things that we are most likely going to be remembering. I'm sure, we all do very enriching works, but we are going to be remembering those moments as we continue and as we near, sorry, this is taking a dark turn, but as we near the end of our lives. We're going to be thinking back, I'm going to be thinking back about the camping trips that I've been with my partner over the years. And that the time that we have shared with my team members. So yeah, that was a bit lost, but that's where I'm heading.
Thank you, Flavio. I think one of the things we've discovered in this conversation is that there's just so much here, and we wanted to bring in all of your voices. We're running up on our time, so we want to invite you just to put in the chat what is a question that you're holding right now, and Hamida and I will take these and synthesize and think about, do we pick up on this in our November conversation? So I invite you to, just throw in the chat box what question is front of mind for you, or what's tugging at the front of your brain, and I'm going to pass it to Hamida to wrap us up.
Thanks so much, Hillary. So in the chat shortly, you'll see a link to a survey that Hillary's going to share with you. And we really ask that you take a few moments to really let us know, what did you get out of this session? What are some things that stick with you? And what are some things that you still hunger for? This is a way that we get a chance to create this with you and create our next session with you, and kind of get some sense of how is this relationship going. So be in relationship with us, and please take a few moments to spend some time going through that evaluation that we shared. So I really love wrapping up with some conversation gems, and we had so many today. Hybrid work augments flexibility and accessibility. Recruit both current and new employees. Connection to your needs and yourself and communities matters. Ask yourself, is it worth it? Employers and employees play on the same team. Remember that our industries are interconnected. Consider how you and your organization impacts other organizations and other people. Humans deserve respect unequivocally, yourself included. Values-based decisions support healthy employees and organizations. Work should include healthy conditions and healthy compensation. Doing good and receiving appropriate compensation travel together. How are you planning for and supporting future generations? If you're working, you may have had many motivations, and you're still doing it for the money too. Name systems and work to dismantle them whilst building something new. We have to start somewhere with change, no matter how big or small. And most boundaries are made up. How can you break boundaries? Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you all. Please fill out the survey and we'll see you next time.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Atta.
You.
Enjoy the sun while we have it.